All right, so everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our January California High School Speech Association Coach Corner. I am so excited to welcome our speaker. Brad is the director of public policy director at Disability Rights Nebraska. He's also a debate coach at Omaha Westside High School. And I had the honor and privilege of getting to see him present at a conference earlier this year. And his energy was incredible. His message was incredible. And I was just like, please come talk to my friends in California. And fortunately tonight we've got people from all over the country joining us, which is really exciting. So please join me in welcoming my friend, Brad Meurrens. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight because this is an opportunity to talk about two of my most favorite things, debate and disability issues and disability advocacy. And so I will try to contain myself because this is, like I said, the marriage of my two favorite things. And I have a tendency to the one thing I always tell folks is like, if you give me an open mic, you run the risk of me talking. So I will do my best to contain my excitement and focus my energies on my presentation tonight. So yes, my name is Brad Meurrens and I am the Public Policy Director at Disability Rights Nebraska. Disability Rights Nebraska is the designated protection and advocacy organization for persons with disabilities in Nebraska. In the mid to late 70s, Congress passed legislation requiring that all states and territories in the US have a designated protection and advocacy organization for persons with disabilities in that state. So we are the P&A for Nebraska. There's a P&A in California. There's a P&A in Boston. There's a P&A in every state. Virgin Islands, the Northern Marianas Islands, all have, each have a designated protection and advocacy organization. Basically, our charge is to protect and advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities in our state. So I want to try to talk about disability and debate, or debate from a disability perspective, and talk about some of the lessons that I've learned and some of the things that concepts and ideas that I've been exposed to and talk about in my life as a disability advocate and lobbyist, and try to kind of put those in a debate context. And I think there's a proper fit. And I hope that these sort of mottos, concepts, and ideas, while they are intended to be disability focused, I think if you really think about it and expand and create the link stories for yourselves, I think you'll find that these concepts are more universal than they may appear on face. So a little bit of my background. So I graduated from Omaha Westside High School in 1991. I was on the debate team my 3 years that I was allowed to be on the debate team. From back in those days, you could only be on the debate team your sophomore, junior, and senior year. So I started my debate career in 1988 on the retirement security topic. My affirmative was give pets to the elderly. It wasn't topical, but whatever, I didn't care. My junior year, the topic was prison overcrowding. And then my senior year was space exploration beyond the Earth's mesosphere. I also debated at the University of Nebraska Lincoln my first 2 years. The topics there were the Supreme Court privacy recognition overturn, one or more Supreme Court decisions recognizing the right to privacy. Plus my second college topic in the NDT area was Southeast Asian Development Assistance. And then I was coaching at Lincoln Southeast for a couple of years. I went to go coach at Omaha Westside in 1996 to 97. Then I had the fortuitous opportunity to attend a wedding in Detroit, meet Frank Irizarry, and be offered a position to coach at Syracuse University. And then I coached there for a year on the college scene. And then I kind of came back to debate after going to DC and finishing up graduate school, going to DC, coming back to Nebraska. I decided to hop back into the debate scene. I coached at Elkhorn South, Millard West for a few years, coached at Elkhorn South for a few years, and now I'm back at Omaha Westside. I've been there for the last 3. So I've been all around the horn, seen a lot of things, been involved. But again, I really like. I mean, this activity has given me a wealth of opportunities. I'm so glad to be a participant, and my life would not have been the same without it. So with that sort of thing, I'd like to kind of get into my little PowerPoint, and then there were some questions that were raised earlier. I've got some comments to that, and then I'd be happy to take any questions I can. So without further ado, let me pull up my PowerPoint. Get my timer ready. Okay, let's see. So again, my name is Brad Meurrens, and my topic of the lecture today is disability and debate, lessons learned from the disability community. Now, this PowerPoint slide was created from the earlier PowerPoints that Angelique was talking about at the Nebraska Speech and Theater Coaches Association. Was asked to do a presentation with my friend John Holan from Lincoln East High School about inclusivity, diversity in debate. So I thought, well, you know what, my life as a disability advocate might be relevant. So I think there's some lessons that we can learn from my experience, I think might be relevant for you. So let's start here. So inherency. Oh, by the way, I'm an old policy debater, and I'm going to make policy and debate jokes throughout the presentation. So I love to talk about inherency. It is the most undervalued stock issue, but it is also the most important stock issue because it exposes the de jure and the de facto. Oh, I was also a Latin major, so I have to get my Latin in there somehow, make that degree pay for itself. So there are the inherency is the stock issue, and it exposes the de jure and de facto exclusion. And it exposes the tools that create and perpetuate stigma and discrimination. How is that? Well, in terms of inherency, I think that that the two most common forms, both in debate and in the real world, structural inherency. I remember I quizzed one of my younger coach friends. I said, "Do you know what structural inherency is?" He said, "Yeah, my coach made me memorize it." I'm like, "Good." Structural inherencies, laws or other barriers to the implementation of the plan or the causes of the harms. Attitudinal inherency is also at play here. That is the beliefs or attitudes which prevent the implementation of the plan or the causing of the harms. Am I right, Frank? Both structural and attitudinal inherency are at play regarding inclusivity in debate, especially but not exclusively for students with disabilities. What do I mean? Well, the structural inherency are like the tools by which we can exclude people. For example, my ideas here are placing rounds on floors that require stairs. And attitudinal inherency are those beliefs which perpetuate those ideas that we aren't thinking about disability and what would be at play for those individuals and how our attitudes play a function in the extension of those stigmas. Next. So concepts and mottos from the disability community. How can they be applied to debate? What is the link? Okay. So I think one of the mottos and concepts from the disability community that's at play here is the simple concept that disability is a natural part of the human experience. The Development of Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act, their 1993 amendments, talk about this language in here. Disability is a natural part of the human experience that does not diminish the right of individuals to enjoy the opportunity to live independently, enjoy self-determination, make choices, contribute to society, and experience full integration and inclusion in American society. And I think if we start with that premise, that disability is not strange, that it's natural, that I think sets the foundation for that sets the springboard for all the other concepts that we'll talk about today. It also, I think, kind of forces us into this idea that disability is not unusual, it's not wrong, it's not deviant, but actually is a natural part of the human experience. One of the things that we talk about in the disability community also is if you live long enough, you're going to acquire a disability more than likely. My parents were that way. They eventually, toward the end of their life, they needed walkers, they needed canes, they needed medications, they had functional limitations. So, you're probably not going to avoid disability. And we also talk about how disability is universal. It does not respect any social, economic, racial, class, any of those barriers, whether every person in those sort of categories and in those communities can acquire a disability. It could happen to you, it could happen to me, it could happen within 30 seconds. Another concept that is strong in the disability community is nothing about us without us. Nihil de nobis sine nobis. That's Latin. I got it off Wikipedia, but I had to throw it in there. Again, making my bachelor's degree pay for itself. So nothing about us without us. It's an old slogan, but we use it in the disability community to communicate the idea that no policy should be decided by any representative without the full and direct participation of members of the groups that are affected by that policy. I got a little lazy and I pulled that definition off of Wikipedia, but the idea is that people with disabilities, their families, are the experts on disability, and their inclusion and their input in the policy process is absolutely critical. The lived experience of people with disabilities is vital. That is the expertise. Well, I can't speak to those issues because I don't have that experience, but people that do can tell me and can tell us and can infuse and input and feedback and make the best policy option. Or as the University of Iowa used to argue in their plans back in the day, the optimal policy mix. Another thing that I always tell advocates, and I tell people who want to get involved in advocacy, I always tell people, I'm like, look, they can't say your story is wrong because it's your story. And one of the things I always told my public speaking students in Syracuse, I always, when they were, we're a little apprehensive about their speeches and we're a little kind of worried, I kind of say, all right, look, I got one question for you. Well, maybe two, but one major one. Did you do the reading? Did you do the research? Do you know this topic? Did you read this topic? Yeah, then what do you got to worry about? Because no one else in this audience knows this topic as well as you do. And nobody else in that audience wants to be up in front of the group like you do. So don't worry about it. They're not going to challenge you because you know more than they do. So in the words of Aaron Rodgers, relax. And what I always tell people in the disability communities is, especially those people with disabilities who want to start advocacy, I always say, look, I go to testify in front of the legislature, or I go into a meeting or a hearing or regulation hearing, or I write some testimony, or I write a position paper. I run the risk of them saying, dude, Brad, you're wrong. You totally misread that article. Your statistics are outdated. Oh, gee, it sounds like a 2AC, 2NC reply, right? I'm used to that. They can say that I'm wrong because I don't have that lived experience. I don't have that expertise. I bring in things like law reviews. Oh, I bring in things like a 1AC. Law reviews, statistics, the law. Bring in those hardcore facts, the data, because that's my role. And I always tell them, I say, well, but your role doesn't have to necessarily be that. Your role is to provide your story. And why is that important? Because your story combined with my data gives a fuller picture. Because if they just listen to me, well, they'll get the idea, and I will bury them in information because I'm a 2AC by heart, okay, right? That's only going to give them partial picture. People with disabilities, you have to provide that context and fill in the cracks. And so on the left-hand side are some of the ideas that I've got. I've put together an advocacy planning activity form that I'd be happy to send around that kind of helps break down a step-by-step, or at least kind of break down an approach to an issue, which kind of may seem overwhelming. Well, that issue is so big, I wouldn't even know where to start. Okay, well, break it down. Well, so I've got a form that can help with that. My friend Lynn Redding, she's a quintessential example of this process and nothing about us without us, and this whole like your story is not wrong thing and the advocacy. She provided some really good testimony. I'd be happy to share that with you. And the other thing that I've been telling people recently in the last, I don't know, year or so, when I talk to families and when I talk to advocates and when I talk to individuals with disabilities, I always say the lived experience part, the history, your story is important because you are the translators. I can't translate, you can. For my example is this. If the legislation calls for a 5% cut in the amount of funding for developmental disability or mental health aid, oh, well, it's a 5% cut. I mean, it's a 5% cut. It's not even 10%. It can't be all that bad. It's 5%. It's minuscule. I mean, but if you're one of those folks that relies on that 5% cut, it's not minuscule for you. And only you can talk to those policymakers or whoever that is and explain to them what that 5% cut means in the real world at the macro level, which they don't have, maybe don't have that experience, or maybe don't see it at that level. So that's why I say that people with disabilities and that lived experience and that self-advocacy is so important, because you're the translators. I can't translate it, only you can. Another motto that we have, and which I think was one of the things that Angelique talked about when she came up to me at the Speech and Theater Coaches Association presentation, but she really liked this idea of dignity of risk. Now, again, I don't think this is a uniquely disability related concept or motto, but we use it a lot within the disability community. And that idea, or the definition, is that of course, Wikipedia, sorry, I got a little lazy, but I thought this was a really good conceptualization of it. That the dignity of risk is the idea that self-determination and the right to take reasonable risks are essential for dignity and self-esteem. And so a couple of examples I have for you here are links to, hi Smoothie, are a couple of links to some really short video clips that I think really explain this concept of dignity of risk. The Minnesota Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities, hint, hint, if there's a Minnesota Governor's Council, I bet you there's a California Governor's Council. And there's a really good video from a self-advocate from the Green Mountain Self-Advocates that really conceptualizes it from a disability, from a person with a disability perspective. And I think, parents, another example I have of this dignity of risk is many of you are parents. And you're eventually going to have to let your children or your child go out on a Saturday night. You give them that dignity of risk. You say, I'm going to give you the dignity of making your own choice this evening. And it doesn't say that you have to be unreasonable. Like, be irresponsible with the car. No. But you give them the dignity of going out and striking out on their own and making their own choices and having that idea of self-determination. And for people with disabilities, so often they are people tend to, or institutions and facilities, the idea, the attitudinal inherency is to overprotect. And that's kind of been what has happened in the lives of persons with disabilities, especially from a historical perspective. We still haven't gotten completely rid of those patronizing, paternalistic senses of overprotection for persons with disabilities. We are much better now in 2022 than we were in 1922. We still have a ways to go. But again, the idea of dignity of risk. Now, what do I mean in terms of debate? Well, I would say, I'm not going to make all the link arguments for you, because as a judge, I'm not going to do all the work for you. You got to come up with the link stories you're on your own as well. But maybe here's an example of what I'm talking about. Let the kids try it out. Just because the student uses a wheelchair does not mean the kid can't speak. Just because they use a wheelchair does not mean you can't transport them, or they can't be transported, or you can't go to a tournament. Dignity of risk. Let them try it out. You'd be surprised. And I think,
Brad, I'm so
Oh,
sorry to interrupt. We've got a chunk of people in the waiting room.
oh,
You want to invite them really quick? Sorry.
okay, sure.
I want to make sure you have a giant, wonderful audience.
So I've got, okay, so yeah, so, give them the idea, give them the dignity to allow them to make choices and take risks on their own. You would want that for yourself, wouldn't you? And I also think this kind of gravitates into and it connects with this idea of low expectations. The idea hold on, sorry, that low expectations reinforces exclusivity. You can't do that. That you can't be expected to do that. I mean, how can you debate? You use a white cane. How can you debate? No one else in the team needs a wheelchair. But you'd be surprised at what anyone can do when they're given access, opportunity, support, and the dignity of risk. You'd be surprised. I know I have been in my 20 years of doing disability advocacy. I'm surprised every day at what people can accomplish when they're given those access, opportunity, support, and the dignity to take risks. And then on the left-hand side is a link to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the idea of the dignity of risk and dignity. That's going to be a recurring theme, by the way. So if you're taking notes, put a little asterisk by the word dignity. Okay, that respect and inherent dignity, individual autonomy. Oh, hold on, I gotta move this here. Individual autonomy, making freedom to make your own choices is key to the independence of persons and all that. So that's a really important concept. Anybody else in the waiting room? Next slide. So one of my last mottos here. Hold on, excuse me. Screen here. Oh, sorry. So one of the last concepts and models from the disability community I want to talk about is the concept of lights, camera, access. But more importantly, access. What do I mean by that? Well, I also fashioned myself a little bit of a poet back in my high school days, so I'm going to wax a little poetic here. Accessibility is key, but will require creativity. My next off case, topicality. So accessible means that a person with a disability is afforded the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, store the same services as a person without a disability in an equally effective and equally integrated manner. The person with a disability must be able to obtain the information fully, equally, and independently, that's important, as a person without a disability. This language comes from the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. They had a settlement with the South Carolina Tech College. And that's the definition that the U.S. Department of Education provided in their settlement. That may be a really kind of a legalistic, jargony language. So I think Indiana University, and by the way, these are all linked in here. So if you want to click on those when to have the slides, go right ahead. I thought Indiana University's language is pretty good as well. They talk about accessibility as the degree to which a product, device, service, environment, or facility is usable by as many people as possible, including those with disabilities. And that accessibility requires knowledge of accessibility standards, being aware of the needs of persons with disabilities, and addressing barriers to access for individual disabilities. So I wanted to highlight all of those pieces. I think those will become a little bit more apparent why I underline. Again, I'm a former policy debater, so I underline and highlight down language in cards. So it's just my nature. I can't change who I am and what I do. So that's just what I do. I even do that with the legislature. I will, if I have a quote, I will underline and boldface the quote, the parts of the language of the card that I want the senators to read. So it's a habit. But anyway, moving on. So access, it's beyond the staircase and it's beyond the curb cuts. So accessibility encompasses more than just building or structural accessibility. It's more than just stairs, doors, etc. I think there's a really good video that my office put together that talks and shows some of the things to notice about accessibility issues that come up that we've noticed when we're talking about and going to polling places. But I also think that is a good video for you because I think it shows you the structural inherency, right? Why, like the structure, the sidewalk is chewed up. The door is too heavy. The structural exclusion pieces, the structural pieces of exclusion. And it also demonstrates how attitudinal inherency is involved too, because people maybe don't think about, well, why is it so bad that this is a gravel parking lot? Why is it so bad that, okay, yeah, the sidewalks are chewed up a little bit, but you can walk across it. Why is that so bad? Attitudinal inherency. And I also think this video is really good because it talks about why the input of people with disabilities is vitally important as the universal solvent to bring in chemistry. I hated chemistry, but I just like to quote it. I end up quoting things that I don't like physics, math, and chemistry more than Latin. So go figure. But it's a universal solvent. And that I also think another example I have for you is something that happened to me at Nebraska Disability Pride Day last year. We have in our state an ADA coordinator. Her job is to take complaints about accessibility and ADA related complaints on the state level in terms of a state entities, state agencies, right? Or in terms of other places across the state. But she came to me, and Gloria is a wheelchair user, and we held the Disability Pride Day. It wasn't just me; it was a bunch of other organizations. It was a coalition. Held this Disability Pride Day outside in a park, and Gloria came to me and she said, it's lucky that I got this big fat tire, special tire for my wheelchair today, because if I hadn't had this big fat tire, I would have my wheelchair wheels are so narrow that they would have literally sunk into the ground and I would have been stuck in this field. And I was like, we didn't think about that. But I'm glad. So what I said, Gloria, I'm glad you mentioned that. I will take this to the planners for the next one and make sure that this does not happen again. Now, two important things there. I think one is to think beyond the sidewalk. If you're gonna hold an event on the grass, make sure that you let people know that it's going to be on the grass so they can prepare their wheelchairs to be to make sure they can roll on the grass, or make sure that you don't hold it on places where there's grass or there might be problems for persons. And I also think the second implication of that is very simple. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Now you told me that this is a problem. I will make note of that and it won't happen again. And Gloria was like, cool, great, awesome, thank you. And then we moved on and she enjoyed the rest of the day and the speakers. So another thing I think is in terms of access, think broadly and ask questions. What do I mean? Well, for one thing, accessibility, again, beyond the sidewalk and the curb cuts, right, and the staircase, accessibility applies to more than just those staircases in elevators. It applies to things like websites. For example, there are some web pages on the state of Nebraska's website where people who are blind, in fact, some of the employees that are blind who use screen readers can't access the check boxes on the screen because it doesn't interface with their screen reader. There are established criteria and standards for accessibility for websites. I forget what the actual section 508 WWGA 2.0, but websites need to be accessible. My point here is that, again, think broadly about accessibility. It's not just curb cuts. Are your materials accessible? Are they readable by a screen reader? I think a lot of screen readers now will accept PDF formats. So when I go and when we had a board member a few years ago that used a screen reader, and Carlos told me, he said, dude, I can't take Excel files. So when you send me your bill chart of the bills that you're working on this year, don't send to me in Excel, send to me a PDF, because my screen reader won't read Excel. I'm like, duly noted. Won't make that mistake again. I will fix it. From then on, everything's in PDF. And ask questions. Again, people with disabilities have that lived experience. They know what's accessible. They know what works for them. Think about it. Make it known that your activity, i.e. your tournament, is accessible and reasonably accommodating. Visibility is critical. Accessibility allows visibility, and that visibility raises awareness, and it helps make things accessible. If I don't know there's a problem, I can't fix it. And if it's not visible, how am I going to know there's a problem? And if you don't raise the awareness and help make things visible, we can't accommodate them. And then I also think, don't be afraid to ask for an accommodation. And I have a link here to one of the things I raised in the Speech and Theater Coaches Association presentation was, another analogy you might want to think about is when you're is making or asking for reasonable accommodations in the job, on a job. That might be an example or some things to think about in terms of thinking about what is accessibility and broadening those horizons. Access, what does it mean to you? What is it for someone that you know? What are the characteristics of accessibility? What is a reasonable accommodation, and how does that work? Check out that link there on accommodation, and I think that will help you. Another thing we brought out was valued team roles. Everyone has a role to play, but sometimes it takes some thought and discussion, creativity, about what that role and what those responsibilities could be and could be created, or how they could be filled. So, for example, if a student doesn't want to compete, maybe they are, having some anxiety about competing. Maybe they can help to track win-losses. Maybe they can help track, run the database to track your opponent's cases, or, social media or something. Is there some role this person can play on the team? And these roles can be created, but these roles have to be created and evaluated through a dignity framework. Policy debater in me, sorry. A dignity framework. We don't want to create alternative or other roles for people who, for in this example, for kids with students with disabilities that are throwaway roles, that don't have value, that don't provide dignity to that role. Here, an example I've got is the Gorovich affirmative. So on the last Lincoln Douglas topic, the right to strike topic, I found in the literature this article by Alexander Gorovich. His article was the right to strike, a radical approach. And I'm like, ooh, radical, that sounds awesome. So I found it, and I'm like, well, you know what? I can't get it off of Google, and I can't get it. So we had a student that had, we had a teacher, a special education teacher at Westside that had sent out a missive to the staff and said, I've got this student who's really interested in filing and organizing and wants to work in a library. So if you ever have any filing, those sort of filing needs, let me know. And I said, oh, I'm the debate coach. I always have filing needs. So, so what we did was I said, hey, we need this article, but I can't get it. Can you go, can this student, can he go find it for us? I don't know if it's on the databases that we have, that you have at Westside, or I know it's at the university. If we don't have it here, can you at least tell me what the call number is and where I can go get it? Can you? They emailed it to me like 3 days later, and it ended up being the affirmative author and the advocate we were for our affirmative. It was our affirmative, and we would not have gotten that if he had not gone through and retrieved it for us in their own databases. And I asked him to do the research that for articles we can't get easily off of the online, off of Google, or I don't have. If I can't find it, I always ask him to go get it for me. Maybe I can do more. I can do more. I've got to do some more creative thinking about getting him more involved, but he's an important part of our team and value. Play to the students' strengths, don't focus on their deficits or your perceived assessment of their strengths, or what you perceive as what they can and can't do. Again, the idea of low expectations. Let them drive. They may need guardrails or they may need some guidance. Who doesn't? I mean, I do. And I've been doing debate for 30 some years, but let them choose their own adventure. Again, to date myself, right? Give them the dignity of risk. Let them choose. Create a space for them to showcase their strengths, their talents, and their abilities. Again, I want to wax poetic. Creatively create perhaps a public debate, opportunity and access you can relate. And then on the left-hand side is a link to this concept called social role valorization theory. And this is where this idea comes from. Social role valorization is the concept or the notion that people who have devalued social roles or very few or marginally valued social roles, they, that's where a lot of the discrimination, stereotypes, and devaluation stems from. And that the idea behind social role valorization is that if you provide these individuals with valued social roles, that their positive status will attend to them, and that will be a key to letting them obtain the benefits inherent in any given culture. Long story short, if we provide valued social roles for people with disabilities, that flips the script, and they're seen no longer as devalued or dehumanized, but actually having a substantial amount of recognized social value. So again, dignity stems from that, and all those attitudinal barriers will kind of be dissolved, or at least kind of chipped away at through this idea of valued social roles or valued team roles in the debate context. I'd strongly encourage you to look up the social role valorization and read up on that. There's a couple of different institutions institutes that provide these type of trainings. I know we do we do occasionally in my office. There's a Keystone Institute, I think out in Pennsylvania, that does a lot of good work around social role valorization. It's a theory that was produced by a guy named Wolfensberger. I'm not making it up. Wolfensberger was teaching at Syracuse and then the University of Nebraska at Omaha. So happy to claim him as one of our own. Look it up. It's really interesting. Finally, some resources for you. One of the things that I've been talking to my students about, and actually advocates lately, is there's always some information or some knowledge that you will not find until someone points it out. So says Coach Brad. An example that I give to my students is, oh, yay, we have these things called turns. Oh, yeah, there's link turns and impact turns. Sorry for getting policy debate for those non-policy heads, but you'll figure out what I'm talking about in a second. Oh, well, 2 is better than 1, so I can read a link turn and an impact turn. Why did you lose the debate? Well, we ran 2 turns. I thought that was great. Point out the idea that you can't run both, choose one or the other, but you're not going to find that out until someone like Coach Braddock points that out to you and says, this is why we don't do that. So here are some examples, I think, of really good organizations and resources for you. The reason why I want to bring this up, I think this is really important as well, and I want to kind of finish on this part, is we have students that want to do research. They want to develop arguments. They want to develop, position statements, and they sure as heck want to tell you all about it. They want to spend all Saturday or Friday, Saturday of their lives telling you all about it multiple times during the day. We also have organizations, advocacy organizations like mine and others that are advocating in a whole variety of different issues and a whole variety of perspectives. They need people who want to express their opinions. So, we have students looking for an opportunity, looking for a gateway, looking for an avenue to express themselves and voice their opinions. We have organizations that are looking for people who want to voice their opinions. We need to match them up. So this is what I'm doing here. So all of these here are links to these respective organizations, the National Disability Rights Network and Disability Rights California. Again, the Protection and Advocacy Network nationally and the one for California. Those folks would be a great resource for you. And I think another reason why I think these are a good resource for you is that they've done a lot of the work about disability etiquette. What is the ADA? What are the responsibilities? What are the rights? They've done the work. They have resources. They can talk to you about it at a level because they've already done that work. The National Council on Independent Living and the Independent Living Councils out in California are great resources. Assistive technology for education. These are a couple of sources to engage and inquire about getting assistive technology. The ARC of the United States is an advocacy group that focuses on individuals with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. The ARC of California is their state chapter, great resource. The ARC is a really strong disability group. The Education and Defense Fund and the American Association of People with Disabilities will be a great resources for you as well. So again, we've got kids that want to talk. We have organizations that want people to talk. These are some avenues I think that debaters could look into, either to increase their knowledge or to seek out resources that they can get involved in advocacy in the real world. So the last slide is, believe it or not, it's just me. This is a picture here to prove that I was a debater. That's me under the yellow arrow with my partner to my right, Anders there. To the right on the screen is my contact information. I would suggest, again, check out our legislative updates, which will give you all the bills that we're working on, that I'm working on, and my testimony, what we've said, what our position is on certain bills. Our Law in Brief series, which is basically our lawyers taking legal concepts like Title I of the ADA, Title II of the ADA, and breaking it down and explaining it. We have a Facebook page and a YouTube channel. So again, look us up, find out what we're about, and find out what the disability P&A in your state is all about as well. That was kind of quick. I apologize for speaking fast, but I'm a policy debater by heart. I can't help it. And I would be happy to, stop share. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have at this point.
We have this couple that were pre-submitted. If you want me to pull them up.
Yeah, yes. Let's see. So actually, let me see if I can share my screen here. Okay. So there were some questions that were raised ahead of time. The first question is talking about a dad who wants to judge, who has has quadriplegia and has a disability. I thought my answer to this was, see the creativity piece I talked about earlier. Again, accessibility might require some creativity. I also would suggest that there's Disability Rights Washington, like Washington State. They're a very strong protection and advocacy organization. And they have developed their own sort of like video documentary production department called Rooted in Rights. And they have a video series called Bottom Dollars, which is talking about the sub-minimum wage issue for persons with disabilities. But I think it's important, it might play a role here because especially in chapter 6, well, the last like 4 or 5 chapters of the 10-chapter documentary series, go into some vignettes of persons with disabilities who are working and working competitively, not in a sheltered workshop or not for a sub-minimum wage. In particular, I thought chapter 6 would be kind of an interesting and important for you to look at. Might give you some ideas, create a spark for a new link story, if you will. And because that chapter it talks about a man who can only move his head left and right, but he works checking in books at a book depository or a library, I think, or a book publisher, and he has it set up and has an assistant and has worked with the organization to have for him to scan in books. And if it's scanned incorrectly, he moves left, and he's got a sensor on either side of his wheelchair, and he hits left for accepting or right if it's not. I forget exactly which is which, but if you go look at chapter 6 in particular, I think that might perhaps spark the idea that yes, with negotiation and a request for a reasonable accommodation, maybe to the tournament or something like that, creativity might reign, and that might be a way for your dad to enjoy the work of judging. The second question talked about what kind of language could we use in the application or the registration process for SpeechWire. I don't necessarily think the idea of accessibility needs is bad. I don't think it's like wrong, but I would suggest, looking at the language as if it's asking for a reasonable accommodation. What do I mean by that? Well, you'll notice, like, for example, on our legislature's website and on other governmental and other agency websites, they'll have a, if you need a reasonable accommodation, please let us know within a week so we can make arrangements, right? So I think there are models out there for you if you kind of Google it. The language that I use in our tournament invite I have here, we talk about it, we're committed to a fully inclusive and accessible tournament, that no individual with disability shall, by reason of that disability, be excluded from participation. We want to ensure everyone who wants to participate has a chance to do so. So if there's any need for accommodation or to address another issue or barrier, do not hesitate to let us know. Lori is the other coach, the faculty coach who's attached to the school, since I am not. So that's kind of what we have in our language. I'm not saying that's like the ideal, that's the golden standard, but that's kind of what we have put together. I don't think there's necessarily a wrong way of saying that. Here's an example we've used. And again, I think that if you contacted the P&A in your state, I think they'd be able to help there too. And get to know them regardless. They will be a big help. And I think if you go back to the reasonable accommodation link on my on the slide, that might give you, might jog your memory, or create some ideas for you as well. And then the third question was talking about specific recommendations for students that are in policy, debate, and impromptu. Excuse me. Well, I might take a different perspective. I always kind of like to take a different sort of like approach to the topics. My first suggestion is really simple: run disability cases. We do. For example, several years ago, when the topic for the policy topic was education reform, Elkhorn South's affirmative was amend the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to reduce the use or incidences of inappropriate use of restraint and seclusion. So I turned to my debaters and I'm like, this is an issue I'm researching for my job, right? I've got literally I have 3 bucket folders full of research. You know that, right? We should run this. And then on the next year's topic, when it was the immigration topic, we ran get rid of the public charge rule. The public charge rule indicates that they would say that you cannot be allowed into the U.S. if you are going to be deemed a potential public charge, i.e., a drain on the welfare state, or if you will be taking a lot of public benefits. The Trump administration wanted to ratchet up the enforcement and create new standards for excluding people from immigrating. Our argument was that exclusion would disproportionately harm immigrants with disabilities. So again, the idea of visibility comes from not only being in the room. My boss told me really early on in my 20-year career, he said, dude, sometimes you need to just be in the room. You just need to be seen. so people recognize that associate you with a topic, associate you with advocacy, make those connections. Sometimes it's just to be seen in the room, but also raise the disability issues. That's another way to create visibility and awareness. I also think when you have students that have disabilities, make sure they ask for a reasonable accommodation all their rounds where they're needed. What are those accommodations? What would those be? Because remember, the idea behind a reasonable accommodation is it's a negotiation between, in the employment context, it's a negotiation between the employer and the individual. They negotiate what the accommodation is. And then again, take a disability approach to the topics, raise those awareness and raise those issues. And then the last question, I don't have a typed answer for, I apologize. There's my timer. I dropped the perm. I won't go to nationals this year. I did in my senior year. Have we learned any lessons from the remote competitions in terms of benefits or struggles for persons with disabilities? I think we learned that technology can really be an important leveler. Again, that assistive technology can really help individuals with disabilities, students, to participate, not only in terms of geography, but also in terms of, accommodating their needs. Transitioning back to the in-person, again, I think what we need to think about and what we could learn, maybe not necessarily because of the remote competitions, but I think we might want to carry forward the idea of let's be aware and let's be thinking about disability. One last little vignette, and then I think I'm running over time, but I remember several years ago, I had making phone calls to different candidates for a state election races. And I called one of the candidates out in central Nebraska, and I got their chief of staff, and he said, so I wanted to know what's their disability stance, what's their disability policy, what are they thinking about? And this chief of staff guy told me, he was like, I'm really glad you called, because we have a person with disability on our staff, and so does our opponent, and we've never thought about disability policy. I'm just like, you've got a person that you see, let's just assume at least once a week, if not more, in a personal manner, and you've never thought about what their needs might be or what their lives might be like, or thought about that, or asked them like, hey, how do we make this easier for you? How do we make this more accessible for you? I didn't, so again, I think that's the vignette lesson there is just think broadly and ask lots of questions and reach out to your advocacy organizations, whatever issue that might be, they can help you. So does that kind of answer those questions? I guess, I have the time. If there's any more, I'd be happy to answer.
So the discussion happening in chat right now is with Adam's question about, he submitted the question about SpeechWire and the language to use on it. And more specifically, what they have is like a button that it's literally like, disability accommodations, right? So he's asking what would be the preferred language, because in their state, like legally in their state, it's special needs accommodations, which feels exclusionary and othering and things like that. So what would be, like he mentions in there, he doesn't really care what the legal term is. If it's, he'd rather have a kinder term. And so he tried to use accommodations, just accommodations broadly, but his coaches thought that meant hotels. So what would your recommendation be for something like that?
I like, you had mentioned something here in the chat box about disability accommodation request. I think that would be great. I think that's fine. I do kind of bristle at the idea of special needs because those people's needs are not special. I need access to documents just as much as anybody else does. Those aren't special needs. Those are needs for everybody else. Everyone needs to be loved. And everyone has, those aren't special. And I think, so that's just my own thing. But I like the disability accommodation request. Again, it gets at that, that sort of a nuanced niche accommodation, and gets you out of the whole hotel thing. Oh, and also, again, I would suggest, based on my, when we go back and we start to travel, if you do have students with disabilities that need an accommodation in their hotel, a hotel accommodation, right? They need a disability specific room, right? make that hotel accommodation early and follow up like a dog on a scent, because I have had it happen where we've made attending a disability conference in DC or whatever. I have seen it happen. It just happened to me where we requested an accessible room. Oh yeah, no problem, no problem, no problem. We got you, we got you. We get there, guess what? Oops, we don't have any more. Like, whoa, 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 we reserved this like 4 weeks ago. Sorry. And now it's too late. Or they say, oh yeah, it's accessible. The shower, the bathroom has a lip on it. Oh, but everything else is accessible. I'm like, so again, my recommendation is if you need that accessible room, make it early and follow up, and make sure it's explicitly clear. I'm not throwing daggers at the hotel industry. I'm just saying my experience has been sometimes sometimes snafus happen.
I have a question that's been kind of jumped around a little bit in some of the coach groups lately about, coach was asking about accommodations for a student with a stammer or a stutter, right? And what, one, how to ask for that accommodation, which is its own question, right? Which I think a lot of folks had some ideas on, but more directly, as like a tournament director, how can I fairly and reasonably accommodate that? Because while talking to that coach, and this is not a coach from California, so it's not somebody I'm actually in charge of, but in having that conversation with them, I know that, when someone has an accommodation for something like, a kid has a broken leg or something and needs to leave extemp prep 5 minutes early, that's easy. No one's going to complain about that. But if I have a student that needs, for example, extended speaking time, right, or extended prep time, there is, a pushback from members of the community who think that is creating an unfair advantage. Now, they're wrong, right? We know that. And certainly I know a lot of tournament directors who would push back at that. But do you have any advice for when you're running a tournament and you want to accommodate these reasonable requests, how to deal with kind of the pushback that's going to come back from the folks who are used to a particular way of doing things?
Well, no, that's an excellent question. And I know I have, so I think in the debate round, I have seen it, and I've been in a couple of rounds where the competitor said, I have a speech impediment, I have a stutter, so that's going to happen. I'm like, okay, cool. I won't take it off your speaker points, and I will be more, maybe I won't be so technical on the flow, I can give a little bit of reasonableness, and I can accommodate that a little bit as a judge. So I think, and as a competitor, and I haven't had the experience, at least not my experience anyway. Now, granted, I don't judge as often as I do, and I don't judge around the country like I did back when I was in my 20s. But I have not experienced a bad reaction from the competitor. Now, granted, it's been mostly in Lincoln Douglas because that's what most of my students do or compete in now. But I think, if the student raises that accommodation request, and then I also told my students, I'm like, because they get flustered when they encounter the spread debate, and I'm like, I'm a child of spread debate. It's what I love to do. But I said, but there are techniques and tips and techniques that you can use to counter that. What's, again, one of those things that let me show you, what those might be. So again, don't be afraid to ask for accommodation. And again, it's a negotiated, the idea behind a reasonable accommodation in the work world, it is a negotiation between parties. And then in terms of the tournament director part, yeah, I have not run into the whole, those issues around like extended speech times. And those might be kind of tricky to do. They may be, those sort of things might be easier to accommodate in terms of like test taking in school, which you can give, those kids a little extra time for those standardized tests or for a test taking. I don't know. I have not seen that sort of applied in debate, and I don't know. I think you probably get a lot of pushback, but I think, but there's got to be a way. Again, creativity. You know, is there a way that coaches or mentors can help the students or develop those quicker thinking skills? And again, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, they're going to go from 0 to 100, and I'm not saying it's on them, like you got to conform. But maybe there's a way that to for instruction to accommodate that students, you know, can get them to a little faster cognition or a faster rate. Not saying that that's, you know, the way it ought to be. And also, you know, the thing I always kind of think about is like, but yeah, you're going to have that problem when you go to testify at the unicameral. Now, one of the things that a lot of my friend Kathy Hall, a strong advocate here in Nebraska, when she goes and testifies in front of the unicameral, she goes up there and she says, she wheels up to the table, and on the table it has like in like Law and Order, they have the red light, the green light, and the yellow light, little lights for your speech. She says, I'm here, I'm telling you right now, senators, I am requesting a reasonable accommodation because I have a speech impediment. I'm not going to be subjected to the time constraints that you have for your testimony here. And you know what's funny? Those lights go off. Like, she just makes the statement and all of a sudden, poof, and she goes, and no one dares interrupt. Well, it's Kathy, no one dares, but no one interrupts her or stops her. They let her talk because she makes a reasonable. Now, again, that might not be so easy to do in, you've got a 4-minute speech. I can't give you 25 minutes, like just like there is no 3 and R. But yeah, that's coming on a case by case basis, I think.
Are there any other questions? Any situations y'all have run into as coaches or anything like that?
I just want to ask if it's okay if one of my students communicates with you. His advocacy is on ability and accessibility this year, and I would love to have you as a direct quote with his piece, which we're beefing up for state qual. So it's a shameless plug for my kiddo.
Yes, I tell you what, have him call me, email me, send me a carrier pigeon, whatever it takes. I would be more than happy to help in whatever way I can. Have him get in touch. Let's do this.
I've already emailed him tonight, so it'll be tomorrow. Check your email about 1 o'clock. Thank you much.
Well, wonderful. All right. Well, when we're done in just a minute, I will make sure that this gets uploaded to the Chassis YouTube page, and we'll send a follow-up email out to everyone with Brad's slideshow. So that way you have all of those handy, amazing, incredible links that he worked so hard on. And please feel free, of course, to share with any coaches who couldn't join us tonight who might be interested. I think this is such an incredible philosophy for us to share. As Brad mentioned, I am a big fan of his dignity of risk concept that he talked about. He talked about that when I saw him in Nebraska, and it was like a light bulb went off in my head, because it's like, wait a minute, yeah, a lot of what we do in speech and debate is us trying to protect people from being hurt, right? And it's our students with disabilities, it's our female students, right? Our students, saying like, oh, judges are going to judge you terribly if your, skirt is the wrong length or whatever nonsense that we deal with, right? That comes from a place of wanting to protect them. But there is that dignity of risk, and that's so important. It's such a beautiful way to phrase it that I think is something we all need to really focus on with speech and debate. McKendra, did you have a question?
I just wanted to say that the head of my special ed department stopped by to speak with me this evening before she was leaving, and she ended up staying for your seminar. And she actually asked if we could share that with our entire school and our SPED department. And I was thinking, we have a copious number of teachers on the board and in this room, and I think it'd be amazing if you emailed the link to your SPED departments tomorrow, because also when we look at classrooms, that dignity of risk is really valuable for the way that we deal with our students in scoring and just teaching. And I just am thinking about the possibilities of what we can do on our campus all of a sudden. I mean, we're revolutionizing the world. So just a thought. She's really excited, but she ran out the door. Her kid has a pig at FFA. Okay.
It's a very California problem. Luca.
And Nebraska too. FFA
and Nebraska. Good point. Good point.
All I wanted to add was that the dignity of risk works. And I am a perfect example of what happens when you give that dignity and give a person a voice. Like, I'm a student with autism. only way I'm where I am today is because of speech and debate and because of the dignity of risk existing. That's why this stuff's so important to me. That's why I'm appreciative of Brad like taking the time to talk about this, because it's not thought of a lot. We're not in this activity. I'm probably one of very few coaches on the autism spectrum coaching today. Like, there are very few of us in this activity, and people advocating for it and expanding upon interpretation and views of disabilities is really important, because we're so much farther now than we were even 5 years ago when I was a competitor. And I really appreciate it.
Right. Well, unless anyone has any other questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, applause, then I think we're all good. Brad, you are incredible. We adore you. You are amazing, and we're so grateful. I will send you a message with my email so you can shoot me over all that stuff. And I'm going to stop recording now. So there we go.